see if I can get this to... There we go. Okay, we're now doing the second half of this week's lecture. It's the lecture that's scheduled for today, Thursday. I did part 1, which was propulsion. This is secretions. And we covered some of this stuff briefly in that introductory lecture for the GI system, but these two are going into more depth on some of those same topics. So when the chyme or the bolus of food moves through the alimentary canal, through the GI tract, it has to be mixed and propelled, and it has to be digested and absorbed. And so the secretions are, at each step, are the appropriate juices, gastric juice, pancreatic juice, bile, to produce the digestion process and to signal other parts of the GI tract to do their job as well. So we have the extrinsic pathway through acetylcholine. In other words, the parasympathetic nervous system always turns on the rest and digest system. So overall, you can stimulate the entire GI tract with the parasympathetic nervous system. You also will stimulate it by stretch. So when things arrive in the intestine or in the stomach and distend it, it will cause not only the myenteric plexus to set off the muscle squeezing action, but cause you to deliver more blood to that area and secrete whatever enzymes are needed for that area. And we have chemical receptors that tell us what is actually there. So if fats show up somewhere, you're likely to secrete fat enzymes, fat digestive enzymes, protein receptors for protein enzymes. If you receive too much acid, you'll secrete secretin, which will stimulate the release of bicarbonate to take care of the acid. So here we are, we secrete a lot. Well, first of all of the liquid that we have to take care of every day, or all of the contents, food and drink, about 2 liters a day of food and drink. We make about a liter and a half of saliva every day, most of which we swallow. It's recycled. All of this saliva comes from the blood. It's the liquid of everything that we have. It's all we have is the liquid comes from the blood, turns into saliva, does what it needs to do in the mouth, and then we reabsorb it so we can use it again. The liver secretes about half a liter of bile every day. The stomach, gastric secretions, about 2 liters a day of stomach juice, which has acid and various things in it. The pancreas, 1.5 liters of pancreatic secretions that go into the duodenum to help digest stuff. The intestines themselves secrete 1.5 liters. So somewhere around, depending on your size, 7 to 9 liters of fluid go into the GI tract every day, but only about 1/10 of a liter comes out in the feces at the end. Now remember, urination is a totally different system. That's taking stuff directly from the blood as you filter your blood. What goes through the GI tract comes out in your stool. So you're only releasing about 1/10 of a liter of this fluid in the feces, which means you absorb all the rest of it. So here we have, the saliva, the stomach, the pancreas, the bile, small intestine, a few other modest amounts of secretion. This is saying, about 7 liters. But if you're bigger, it's 9 liters. If you eat more, if you drink more, if you're somebody that drinks water all the time, it could be 10 or 12 liters. pH of your saliva is slightly acidic, even though you neutralize it the best you can. Stomach acid, very acidic, stomach juice. And all the rest of them are pretty alkaline, pretty base. because as the stomach juice goes into the intestine, it needs to be neutralized. Well, you can't stand acid in our intestine. It'll eat holes in it. So the pancreatic secretions have a lot of bicarbonate in them. So does the bile. The intestinal secretions and stuff are pretty basic, and it winds up neutralizing the stomach acid that gets in there. Oops. Secretion of water and electrolytes. A lot of the secretions into the tube are water. It comes in the form of mucus. It comes in the form of water, pure water. It moves electrolytes, so you retain the right amount of electrolytes and lose the right amount of electrolytes, so you don't get out of balance there. One of your main active transporters is this active transporter on this is an intestinal cell. It doesn't look much like a cell, but here's the lumen of the intestine where your food is. Here's your body, and here's the intestinal cell. You're pumping sodium and chloride and potassium this way. Notice this is electroneutral. You've got 2 negatives and 2 positives. So sodium, potassium, and chlorides. The chloride goes out a facilitated diffuser. The sodium will follow the best it can because it is attracted to chloride. And so you're constantly secreting salt, sodium chloride, into your intestine. Now we're going to have to absorb it too, because you can't afford to lose too much salt. But this movement of salt into the intestine will then cause, where's my cursor? Will then cause water to be pulled by osmosis. So as you're moving sodium and chloride, you're going to pull water into the intestine. If you do that too much, you have diarrhea. If you do it too little, you're constipated. So you have to move the right amount of fluid into the intestine to help all of the chyme in your intestine move along. Let's start at the top. Look at your saliva. Now remember, it's like sweat, that your plasma goes through the salivary gland. The blood goes through the salivary gland. Some plasma is filtered and becomes your primary saliva. So it's kind of like sweat initially. It has a lot of salt in it. It's the same as in your blood. And then you add your digestive enzymes and stuff to that by your secretory cells in the salivary gland. Now the things that it does, it has antibodies in it and antibacterials to try to keep your the bacteria from making it from your mouth into your body to keep you safe. It also neutralizes acid. It does have bicarbonate in it to take the acidity in your mouth down somewhat. It winds up still being slightly acidic, but you add bicarbonate that makes it much more basic than it started out. It has calcium to keep your teeth mineralized. It washes your teeth, try to keep your teeth from rotting out of your head. It lubricates stuff so you can swallow your food, and also you need, if you've ever tried to talk with a completely dry mouth, it doesn't work very well. So the water itself and mucus keeps everything kind of damp in there, so everything works. Solvation, you actually have to dissolve your food before you can taste it. Totally dry food will not stimulate your taste buds. It has to be mixed with fluid. And your first digestive enzyme, see the big red here? Salivary amylase starts the digestion of starches. Here are your primary salivary glands. The parotid glands are on the side. The sublingual glands are under the tongue. The submandibular gland is under your jawbone, so it's actually below the jawbone. So if you kind of squeeze your cheeks, you can sometimes feel some saliva coming in through the side, the back of your mouth. If you push your tongue down, you'll feel the saliva coming up under your tongue, your primary salivary glands. And on the little thing I made for the lab, I didn't do the salivary glands. I didn't find a really good model for that. But please learn these salivary glands for the lab practical too. The parotid, submandibular, and sublingual salivary glands, you should know. Now, as I said, your saliva starts out coming from the blood. Where's my cursor again? There it is. It's hard to see it. Okay, so the plasma filters across into here and becomes juice inside of here. Then these cells, they're called acinar cells. The acini are these round blobs, the round things. They look like alveoli in the lungs, and they secrete juice into the hole in the middle. So your acinar cells secrete your basic salivary contents, your salivary amylases and things like that. As you move down the ductal cells, this is the duct that takes it into your mouth, you pull sodium and chloride out. Now, otherwise, your spit would taste really salty, but it doesn't. You remove sodium and chloride to keep that in your body so you won't lose it. And you primarily put in bicarbonate to neutralize the acids that the bacteria in your mouth make. You're trying to prevent your bacteria in your mouth from rotting your teeth away, and so you secrete bicarbonate into the saliva. So we're going to find that this is a common theme, that you make digestive stuff here, and then you secrete bicarbonate on the way down, depending on how much acid you need to neutralize. Largely stimulated by parasympathetic nervous system. So if you smell apple pie and your mouth starts watering, it's because your parasympathetic nervous system caused this system to pick up and cause you to start making some saliva, some extra saliva. Let's see what I have here. Move down into the stomach. See, here's your lower esophageal sphincter. Here's where the food comes into the stomach. The oxyntic glands make really two things. They make hydrochloric acid in this area. Make hydrochloric acid, which is your stomach acid. And then you make mucus, which the mucus keeps doing that. The mucus protects your stomach lining from the acid. Otherwise, you get gastric ulcers. If you don't have enough mucus, the mucus has a lot of bicarbonate in it. It doesn't let the bicarbonate go into here and neutralize the acid because you want the stomach acid. But the mucus protects your stomach lining from the acid that you're producing in here. You also make pepsin, which we'll see in a second. Pepsin is your first digestive enzyme for proteins. So you made salivary amylase to start starch digestion in your mouth, and then in your saliva, and then in your stomach, you make the first digestive enzyme for proteins, the first protease. We also make intrinsic factor, and you'll see that intrinsic factor, my cursor has vanished again, intrinsic factor is absolutely necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12. It's a really strange vitamin in the way you absorb it and use it. It's required for life. Without vitamin B12, you get a megaloplastic anemia that causes your blood cells to swell, your red blood cells to swell up so they won't go through your blood vessels, and it can be lethal. And to be absorbed, B12 needs to bind with intrinsic factor that's made in the stomach. So as you digest the protein, which has most of your B12 in it, and it starts moving along here, it combines with the intrinsic factor that's also made in the stomach. It moves all the way through the intestine, and then in the ileum, the farthest part of your intestine, you have transporters for intrinsic factor and B12. You can't absorb the B12 unless it's connected to the intrinsic factor. So those two wind up in the ileum and get absorbed there, and you wind up getting your vitamin B12 that way. So hydrochloric acid, pepsin, and intrinsic factor. Now, all of these glands in your stomach are down in these pits. All of these are cuboidal secretory cells along here. Up here you can make a lot of mucus. The mucin cells or the goblet cells can be up here. You make the mucus with a lot of bicarbonate. It lies on the surface and helps prevent ulcers by protecting the surface of your stomach. And deep down in here you have a couple of different kind of cells called chief cells and parietal cells. And they make hydrochloric acid and they make pepsin, and they're stimulated by the arrival of food, primarily proteins, arriving in the stomach and in the proximal small intestine. It causes you to release more pepsin to digest that protein, and more hydrochloric acid, which has a couple of effects on digestion. Remember, here's your linear and circular muscles, longitudinal and circular muscles. Your myenteric plexus is between them here. These are all the nerves that control them. And here's the submucosal plexus, which is the nerve center to control secretion and blood flow into the GI tract. Gastric secretion starts your digestion of proteins. Now it's interesting, what you first make in these cells down in those pits is something called pepsinogen. Gen means to create. So these are precursors. If you actually made a protein digester way down in there, it would start digesting your own stomach lining because it's still in the lining of the stomach. So you make a precursor that will become pepsin after it's activated by hydrochloric acid. So you're making pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid turns pepsinogen into pepsin, and then you wind up with these two guys so that you can digest your proteins. You make mucus full of bicarbonate. HCO3 minus is bicarbonate, so protection of the stomach lining. You make intrinsic factor so you can absorb your vitamin B12. Remember that. The acid helps destroy bacteria so that it tries to keep you healthy. Liquefaction of the food. The hydrochloric acid not only destroys bacteria, it not only activates pepsinogen into pepsin, but hydrochloric acid denatures the proteins. It untwists those really tightly coiled proteins, and it denatures them so they relax and spread out so the pepsin can get to them and start digesting the proteins. Very acidic environment. So here we go again. Mucus to protect the stomach from acid. Pepsinogens become pepsin when activated by hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid denatures the food so it can be digested, activates pepsinogen into pepsin. It helps dissolve bone if you accidentally swallow a piece of bone. And it's a bactericide. It helps kill the bacteria that you've eaten. Intrinsic factor. You gotta have it for vitamin B12 absorption. All right, so remember in our initial lecture we talked about gastrin, the G cells, the gastrin cells. Here's a gastrin producing cell, G cell. They're in the wall of the stomach. When protein binds to the G cell says, aha, we're going to have to digest protein. So the G cell causes these little intermediate cells enterochromin-like cells. They're just, say they're histamine-producing cells. They make histamine, which causes parietal cells to make hydrochloric acid. So here's this system, and the reason it's kind of important to know this is because half the world has stomach problems, acid reflux, and all this kind of stuff. So when you get protein in your stomach, you make gastrin. Where's the cursor? You make gastrin. It stimulates the production of histamine. Histamine causes parietal cells to make hydrochloric acid. They also cause another kind of cell called chief cells to make pepsinogen. So when protein arrives, you make hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. We'll see that in a second, though. But this is the acid-producing cascade. Protein binds to G. G stands for gastrin, makes gastrin, causes production of histamine, which causes the production of hydrochloric acid. Now here's why that's kind of important. Stop doing that. Here we have gastrin is being produced, and gastrin causes histamine production. Gastrin causes histamine production, which causes the production of hydrochloric acid. Okay? Now you can also stimulate it with the parasympathetic nervous system, acetylcholine. You know, if you smell a lot of good food, but you don't have anything in your stomach, you'll start getting an upset stomach, maybe an acid stomach, as you stimulate the production of too much acid. So there are a couple of things here. Gastrin can produce hydrochloric acid. Gastrin mostly makes histamine, which stimulates the production of acid. Or the parasympathetic nervous system causes the production of acid. In any case, you're producing acid. Now look what we found. Because people have, gastric problems, cimetidine is a acid blocker that you can get at the drugstore. It blocks histamine production. This is a less used acid blocker that is proglamide, which blocks gastrin in the first place. Atropine can be used to block acetylcholine. Omeprazole or Tagamet is like, the purple pill or whatever. It blocks the proton pumps that actually are pumping out the hydrochloric acid here. Pepsid AC is a histamine blocker. It's cimetidine, so it blocks histamine. So we've learned to block gastrin, we've learned to block histamine, we've learned to block acetylcholine. We've learned, and then after it gets into the stomach, if you didn't block it well enough, you can take Tums, which just neutralizes the acid after it's already there. So this is kind of a big deal. Half the world has, stomach acid problems, and because we know the physiology of this, we've produced products which will block a variety of these different things. Now, I'm not going to ask you if Pepsid AC blocks histamine. I'm not going to ask that you on the test. See what's red? Because we know the cascade, any of these steps, any of them, can be blocked by acid blockers. That's good enough for you to know. So what is a peptic ulcer? Peptic refers to the GI secretions producing a pepsin and hydrochloric acid and that stuff. So a peptic ulcer starts in the stomach. You're making the acid there. So there are two things that can happen. Either you make too much acid and it causes ulcers in the stomach or in the esophagus or in the duodenum, in the proximal duodenum. If that acid gets into those areas too much, they don't have that protective mucus. The other thing that can happen is the degradation of the mucus. If something happens to break down the mucus, then even a normal amount of acid will give you an ulcer. And there are a couple of ways that can happen. If you take too much aspirin or ibuprofen, the reason it causes stomach problems is it breaks down this mucus and causes you to, cursor keeps it just disappears. The aspirin or ibuprofen actually breaks down the mucus, and it causes your acid to start working on your stomach and causes stomach problems. And a really serious ulcer is a pretty serious problem. You know, you're bleeding, you're starting to digest your own stomach lining. And the other one is Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori, which is a bacterium. And this is living in you all the time. It's one of your normal gut bacteria. But if you have too much of it, it eats the mucus. And if it eats too much of the mucus layer gets so thick that you start developing stomach ulcers. So here we have H. pylori, and here we have the mucus that is being eaten away by the H. pylori. The stomach acid is really low, and here's the stomach acid, super low. Here's your mucus layer, and it starts out pretty acidic, but it gets more and more basic as it gets close to your cells. So it has to be this thick. Otherwise, if it gets this thick, you'll be still too acidic by the time you get here, and you'll start damaging the wall of your stomach. Now, this is one of the most famous things in history because for generations, people had been drinking Maalox or something. They assumed that the only thing that caused stomach ulcers was the production of too much acid. One doctor, in his own research, showed that people with too much H. pylori were getting ulcers too, and he discovered that H. pylori was eating the mucus layer and causing the stomach ulcers. Everybody in the medical community laughed at him and called him a quack. So one time in a giant conference, he got up on stage and drank a glass of liquid filled with H. pylori and gave himself a stomach ulcer, and then treated it by taking antibiotics. It took a few weeks for this to happen, but he proved to everybody in the medical community that he was right. And as a result now, a lot of stomach ulcers are actually treated with antibiotics. So here we have, the juice from your saliva comes down here from your mouth. It winds up in here. You add the stomach juices to it containing hydrochloric acid, pepsinogen, which converts to pepsin, and stop doing that. Pepsinogen, which converts to pepsin, and intrinsic factor, and the mucus with the bicarbonate in it. That all dumps into here, and next thing you know, you have a very acidic juice full of fats and proteins and stuff that need to be digested, and they arrive in the duodenum, and you have to do something about it. So the duodenum has receptors primarily for fats and proteins and acid, and as soon as this stuff arrives in here, the duodenum sends out signals to your liver and your pancreas and says we have things that need to be digested and we have too much acid. So you're going to have to secrete digestive enzymes and bicarbonate right here so that you neutralize the acid and not give yourself an ulcer. And so you digest the food. Remember, the duodenum is the beginning, the jejunum is the middle, the ileum is the end, right before the ileocecal valve. The first and most important producer of digestive juice, digestive enzymes, is the pancreas. The pancreas wins. It's nice to have salivary amylase. It starts the digestion of starches, but if you didn't have it, your pancreas would digest them anyway. It's so powerful. It digests proteins really well. So pepsin, if you have part of your stomach removed for one reason or another, you can still digest proteins, maybe not in giant amounts as easily, but your digestive enzymes from the pancreas will do it. You digest fat from the pancreas. So remember, the pancreas has endocrine functions. It makes insulin and glucagon in those little islets. But the rest of the pancreas, the acini, which are those round things that secrete stuff into the hole in the middle, and then it goes through ducts to get down to the small intestine, and the acini system is secreting the digestive enzymes, and the ductal cells are secreting bicarbonate, just like your salivary glands, secreting digestive enzymes up in the ball at the top, and then as it moves through the duct, it secretes bicarbonate to neutralize the acid. So here we have the pancreas. Where's my cursor? He defined it. There it is. Here's the acinus. That's a single. Okay, you're secreting, these are those cuboidal cells. You're secreting digestive enzymes into here. Then as it moves along, you're secreting bicarbonate into the tube so that you have the right acid amount or the right acid neutralizer coming in along with the digestive enzymes. The pancreas is long and skinny. These are all secreting into the pancreatic duct, the main duct, which comes along here and then joins with the bile coming from the bile system, the common bile duct and the gallbladder, at the sphincter of Oddi, or hepatopancreatic duct. It dumps it into the duodenum right after the stuff enters from the stomach. So you neutralize the acid and digest the stuff. So you have to stimulate the liver and gallbladder system to dump bile in there for digesting fats, and you dump all kinds of digestive enzymes from the pancreas in to digest proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. It all comes in through this system. Now remember, we're back to our first lecture. What identifies food in the intestine and tells you have to secrete digestive enzymes? Cholecystokinin, CCK, CCK. You're using CCK to send signals to the pancreas and the liver so that you get bile and pancreatic juice dumped in as you need it. Increase the secretion of pancreatic digestive enzymes, CCK. You secrete enzymes to digest everything. And then if you have acid entering, you release secretin as a hormone, and it goes to those ductal cells of the pancreas and the liver, the bile system, and causes them to release more bicarbonate. Secretin affects the ductal cells to release bicarbonate. See? Secretin stimulates the duct cells to release bicarbonate. CCK, pancreas and liver to release the digestive enzymes. Now, the liver is a big deal. The liver does all kinds of stuff. It's the largest of your internal organs. It does a million different things. For this lecture, the main thing it does is secrete bile, which is required for digesting fat because fat doesn't dissolve in your intestine. And so bile emulsifies it into tiny, tiny little drops that can be suspended in your intestinal fluid and reached by the digestive enzymes. So bile is the first step in dealing with fats by emulsifying it or breaking it down into tiny droplets so that your digestive juices can actually get to it. We also know the liver takes glucose and converts it to glycogen and then can release it back into the blood as needed. It synthesizes your lipoproteins, HDL, LDLs, converts glycogen into glucose to raise your blood sugar. It can take fatty acids and turn them into ketones if you're so low on glucose that you need something else to survive on. It produces glucose through gluconeogenesis, synthesizes urea. Ammonia is very harmful to your body, converts it into urea. You can pee it out. Some more. It takes old red blood cells out of the system and puts the stuff that you don't need into the bile. Now, the bile's going into your digestive tract to help emulsify the fats, but it's also getting rid of stuff that your liver decided to get rid of. So the bile goes into the intestine and you poop it out. The bilirubin is this color from your hemoglobin of old red blood cells, and that kind of gives your stool that kind of brownish yellowish color. That's not the color of the food you ate. That's the color of the bilirubin coming out through the bile that's moving into there. People who have liver problems can't get rid of the bilirubin and they turn yellow. Jaundice is the buildup of bilirubin in your body. It makes your skin yellow. It makes your eyes yellow. Your makes insulin-like growth factors, the IGF-1 that helps your growth hormone work. It kills bacteria that come from the GI tract. Remember, the GI system, the way it's set up, your blood goes to the GI tract via various mesenteric arteries and the gastric arteries and stuff, but the blood coming back, the veins come back via the portal system to the liver, so that the liver can kill the bacteria and then use the blood to make its stuff before it puts the rest of the blood back into your general circulation. So the liver has two circulatory systems. It has the hepatic circulation, which is the regular blood coming to the liver to nourish the liver and bring some things that the liver needs to make things with. But it also has this portal circulation coming from the GI tract, full of food and bacteria that all came from your intestine. Now, it's got a pretty interesting process here. Here's the portal vein. It's bringing all of this blood from the GI tract and it dumps it into these sinusoids that are around your hepatic cells. Here you have the hepatic artery bringing blood, and it dumps the blood in there too. So you have the blood coming from the portal system and the blood coming from the hepatic artery all dump in together. Your hepatic cells take what they need to make HDLs and LDLs and do whatever liver cells do, which is a lot of stuff, and to make bile. And then they secrete the bile into the bile duct, and it goes down to your small intestine. So portal blood comes in, normal blood comes in, you take what you need, and you secrete bile, and it goes to the small intestine. It's got, here's the ductal cells that are adding bicarbonate, and here's all of your bile that you're going to need to digest your fats and stuff, and it all goes down, collects in the common bile duct, joins with the pancreatic duct, and dumps into your intestine. So here we have, this is coming from various parts of the liver. You have hepatic ducts. It splits into kind of two big ones, but there are tons of little hepatic ducts or bile ducts in general that come in from the liver that's making bile out of all of the stuff it got. It produces this common bile duct, common hepatic duct, common bile duct, and the cystic duct goes off to the side, which goes to the cyst or the gallbladder. A cyst is a fluid-filled bag. So the cystic duct goes over to the gallbladder, and it joins in with this bile system that's coming from here, produces a common bile duct, which joins with the pancreatic duct to produce the sphincter of Oddi, or the hepatopancreatic sphincter duct thing. Dumps it in here right when you need it to do your stuff. The gallbladder stores bile. So when the sphincter of Oddi is closed, your bile is going in here and concentrating. So you have super bile in here. And when you need it, CCK says, hey, here's fat. CCK stimulates the gallbladder to squeeze. You squirt bile in here. So CCK causes a release of pancreatic juice, causes the gallbladder to squeeze, so it's causing the release of bile and pancreatic juice into the small intestine. Look, an overview slide, because that's a lot of stuff. If you can explain these, you'll probably be in pretty good shape. If you can explain these things, that will help you a lot to get through all of these different secretory systems. And that's the end of the lecture for this week. Remember, it's 2 halves, so this is the secretions. The other half was the first half of that PowerPoint, which is propulsion.